Chapter 1494. Just as Noah and the hero were engaged in the most intense battle in the world above the clouds, there were also two battlefields on the ground. One was the battlefield where Luohao and the masked wind god were. The other was the battlefield where Yerek and Lancelot were. After Noah and the hero flew into the sky, Luohao, Yerek, Lancelot, and the masked wind god each found their own opponents and began to fight. Whoosh! The wind howled above the ground as if it had turned into a tornado, encircling the entire battlefield. It was not a wind generated by nature, but a wind generated by the masked wind god's power. In the center of the huge tornado that surrounded the entire battlefield, Luohao and the masked wind god stood facing each other with a distance between them. Luohao looked at the wind god, who was covered in bandages and wearing a mask on his face, and said coldly, "Unknown wind god, tell me your name." Hearing that, the masked wind god's body surged with a huge amount of curse power, but he did not say a word and completely ignored Luohao's question. This caused Luohao's brows to furrow tightly as she cried out in a delicate voice. "You should be a famous hero, or else you wouldn't follow the hero with the title of the Last King, and not even have the courage to tell me your name." The masked wind god raised his face slightly and faced Luohao with his masked face, still not saying a word. If it were any other time, whoever dared to ignore Luohao like this would definitely be torn to pieces by the unparalleled Wulian Alliance master. However, in the battle, Luohao was a famous wuxia hero, so she immediately understood something. "I see. Can't reveal your real name." In the world of Type Moon, the heroic spirits who descended in the form of servants would try their best to hide their real names in the Holy Grail War. This was because the heroic spirits were very famous heroes in all kinds of myths and legends, and each of them had their own stories. In these stories, the heroes' lives were described, and naturally, the abilities and weaknesses of the heroic spirits were included as well. Under such circumstances, if one revealed their real name without permission, others would find the weaknesses of the heroic spirits themselves from the myths and legends and restrain them. This situation was also applicable to this world. Some gods of disobedience would openly announce their names, just to be worthy of themselves. However, some disobedient gods would also hide their true names to prevent others from finding their weaknesses. Since the masked wind god had concealed his real name, appearance, and even his voice, and was unwilling to speak, he must be a famous god. Once his real name was exposed, it was very likely that his weakness would be exposed. "No, it's not just a weakness." Luohao shook his head and looked directly at the masked wind god. "Since you're the vassal of the hero, doesn't that mean that the hero's true appearance will also be exposed once your true name is exposed?" These words had just sounded when the masked wind god suddenly lifted his head. The masked wind god stomped his feet on the ground and rushed towards Luohao. He clenched his hands into fists and punched towards Luohao without any fancy moves. Humph! In the face of the sudden attack from the masked wind god, Luohao snorted coldly. He neither advanced nor retreated. Similarly, he took a step forward. His right palm shot out at lightning speed, and his palms suddenly clapped. Bang! In the midst of a muffled sound that made people's hearts constrict, Luohao's seemingly weak palm actually slapped the masked wind god's fist away. Then, Luohao raised his other hand and struck a hard palm in the direction of the masked wind god. In this palm, Luohao used the power of the mighty Vajra divine skill and the unique skill of the 12 flying phoenix divine palms, combining the pinnacle of strength and skill, and struck out heavily. The palm, which was strong enough to split mountains and split rocks, caused the air to be compressed and burst, making a heavy sonic boom sound. It was extremely terrifying. The masked wind god did not seem to want to take such a palm head-on. His body suddenly moved, and he dodged Luohao's palm strike. Dong! The palm strike that landed in the air shook the atmosphere, causing the atmosphere to roar. The masked wind god, on the other hand, clenched his fists and put on an offensive posture. Facing Luo Hao's face, he threw out heavy fist shadows, smashing them like a storm. The fist shadows that filled the sky seemed to be chaotic, but in fact, they were faintly bombarding the weak points of Luo Hao's body. The method was quite clever. However, as the king of Wuxia, who was the best in the world in martial arts, Luo Hao easily saw through the mystery and made this female hero who was not inferior to men make a loud declaration. Are you also a person who has reached the pinnacle of martial arts? As he spoke, Luo Hao raised both of his palms and quickly took up the stance of the 12 flying phoenix divine palms. He brandished both of his palms, and the wind from his palms, which carried extreme strength, seemed to form an invisible cyclone, scattering all the gravel on the ground. Bang! In the next moment, the fierce palm wind and the heavy fist shadow suddenly collided, causing the ripples of strength to violently fluctuate. Immediately, Luo Hao and the masked wind god raised their palms and fists at the same time, and with a dazzling speed, they quickly blasted out. Bang! 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 Suddenly, the fierce palm strike and the heavy fist collided again and again, stirring up a low muffled sound that rang out incessantly. In the center of the tornado, the two figures intertwined with each other. Every palm strike, every punch, was almost a head-on collision, causing the vigorous chi to shake continuously. Luo Hao's 12 flying phoenix divine palms was indeed the pinnacle of martial arts. Although the palm strike seemed simple and there was nothing mysterious about it, the entire space was included in the attack range, making it impossible for people to escape. The masked wind god's entire body seemed to be in contact with Luo Hao. This was because the moment he approached Luo Hao, the masked wind god seemed to have turned into a meat grinder. Fists, elbows, fingers, legs, and even any part of the body at this moment erupted with incomparably powerful strength. Under such circumstances, the confrontation between Luo Hao and the masked wind god became extremely fierce. The fists and palms of both sides were like a torrential rain that vented on the enemy's body, causing the Han Chinese clothes on Luo Hao's body and the bandages on the masked wind god's body to be shaken until there were holes in them. Boom! At a certain moment, following a fierce collision, Luo Hao and the masked wind god both took a few steps back amidst the thump-thump-thump sounds. The first person to stabilize his body was the masked wind god. He stomped his foot on the ground and forcibly stabilized his body. The masked wind god suddenly raised a fist, which surged with a strong fluctuation of curse power. At this moment, even Luo Hao could clearly feel it. The masked wind god seemed to have used all the curse power in his body, condensing a force stronger than before. Immediately, the masked wind god rushed out quickly. That speed made the masked wind god's figure directly turn into a light shadow, like a mirage, rushing violently toward Luo Hao. No. That was not just fast speed. That was the power that Noah and Yerek both had seraphic speed. At this moment, the masked wind god suddenly released the power of seraphic speed and launched an attack. If it was an ordinary person, even a god slayer, faced with a sudden attack of seraphic speed, they might not be able to react in time. Unfortunately, Luo Hao did not. This was because this unparalleled Wuxia king had already mastered the mind's consummate skill that could even see through seraphic speed. The general will die soon, the soldiers will destroy his barracks, blood will flow in the wilderness, bones will be left in the border court, leaving only traces of the horse, leaving only the name on paper. In the light ballad, Luo Hao's words turned into a violent demonic wind, which shook from his body. Boom! A powerful storm broke out in the field, directly hitting the masked wind god's body, sending him flying out violently. Like a kite with a broken string, he fell heavily to the ground. Not only did the attack send the masked wind god flying, it also tore apart the bandages on his body. As a result, the masked wind god's body was exposed to Luo Hao's eyes. Looking at the masked wind god's body that was hidden under the bandages, Luo Hao's eyes suddenly focused. Chapter 1495. Luo Hao silently stared at the body of the masked god of wind, who had fallen to the ground. At this time, the bandages wrapped around his body broke apart inch by inch, completely exposing the body hidden inside to Luo Hao's eyes. However, what was exposed was not the skin that a human should have, but a white fur. It did not look messy at all. Instead, it was quite soft, but very dense white fur. Isn't it a human body? In Luo Hao's whisper, the masked god of wind jumped up very flexibly and stood up again. Looking at the broken bandages and exposed fur on his body, the masked god of wind was silent for a long time. After a while, he finally spoke for the first time since he appeared. It seems that there is no need to hide. With such a sentence, the masked god of wind directly tore the broken bandages on his body and took off his mask. The face under the mask, of course, was not a human face. It was an ape's face with a pointy mouth and monkey cheeks. Excellency Ape, with white body hair and a height of about 180 centimeters, appeared in Luo Hao's eyes. He was somewhat similar to the great sage, heaven's equal, and was wrapped in a red waistband. However, unlike the naughty and competitive expression of the great sage, Excellency Ape's expression was very mature, and even faintly had a feeling of being very intellectual and very wise. Excellency Ape with white body hair. Luo Hao's eyes flickered, and he seemed to finally understand something. In all kinds of myths, there were many Excellency Ape with white body hair. However, the medium used by the brave man who followed Excellency Ape to receive the weapons given by the gods of heaven was Manchala. As mentioned before, Manchala was a Japanese magic array with thousands of gods and Buddhas painted in geometric figures. Tracing back to its origin, the origin of the Manchala square could be traced back to India, which was a doctrine advocated by the Hindu religion. In other words, the brave man who used the Manchala square to receive the weapons given by the gods of heaven was most likely a god in Indian mythology. In Indian mythology, when it came to Excellency Ape, who had white body hair and could manipulate the wind, there was only one god that came to mind. Although Luo Hao was extremely lacking in self-awareness, he was not a fool. Having lived for over 200 years, although Luo Hao couldn't be said to know all sorts of mythological systems like the back of his hand, he could still be said to be very knowledgeable. Thinking that the Excellency Ape in front of him was very likely to be the famous divine monkey in Indian mythology, and the hero he followed was the god who annihilated the demon king, Luo Hao was surprised. I see. Is that the hero's true identity? Have you guessed the real name of my master? The white Excellency Ape slowly clenched his fist and stared at Luo Hao. There's no other way. I can't let you leave this place. Excellency Ape's body burst into a violent whirlwind. Although it is my master's duty to annihilate the Demon King, as a subordinate, it shouldn't be too much for me to carry it out on your behalf, right? Do you want to keep me here? Luo Hao smiled, but there was no trace of a smile in her eyes. You are indeed a famous hero, but if you want to keep Luo Zuilian, there should be a limit to your arrogance. Well, the master you follow will be defeated by my husband. In that case, as my husband's concubine, I can eliminate these useless soldiers and crab generals, so as not to ruin my husband's reputation. After that, Luo Hao's feather-like robe began to shake, and the magic storm also swelled from her body and swept away in an instant. In the face of me, the god of wind, you actually used the wind to fight back. Excellency Ape said sarcastically. What a fool. How dare a mere beast question Luo Zuilian's ability? Luo Hao's body surged with amazing curse power. Very well, let me engrave the power of the unparalleled king of Wuxia deeply into your soul, and repent when you go to hell. The extremely violent whirlwind surged wildly from Luo Hao and Excellency Ape, cutting the ground, disturbing the atmosphere, and bringing out a harsh whistling sound that resounded throughout the world. Then, the two raging storms, which were enough to tear the earth apart, hit each other like violent tsunamis. The outcome would be decided in a few seconds. When Luo Hao and the White Excellency Ape were fighting fiercely, on the other side, Yerek was in a rather embarrassing situation. Boom! Accompanied by a roar, the entire ground burst open, setting off thick sand and dust and stirring up a powerful impact force. It carried pieces of gravel and shook in all directions. Yerek, whose whole body was covered with electric sparks, was like being slapped by a huge wave. He rolled out of the thick sandstorm in a very embarrassing way. After rolling on the ground several times, he stabilized his body. Chi! At this time, in the thick sand in front of him, a black shadow suddenly rushed out. With a sharp sound, it appeared in front of Yerek in an instant. It was none other than the knight on the white horse, Lancelot. Lancelot, who was riding on his beloved horse, raised the scale-shaped spear in his hand. With a shake of his arm, the spear violently stabbed at Yerek. Looking at the momentum, if Yerek was stabbed, even if he was lucky, he would be reduced to the same situation as yesterday, with a big bloody hole in his body. Looking at the rapidly enlarging spear tip, Yerek released the power of lightning and fire, and let the electric spark soar on his body. His body turned into a flash of lightning and trembled strangely. Puff! With a tearing sound, the spear fiercely pierced Yerek's chest. However, Lancelot's body suddenly stagnated. This was because not only did the spear not pierce through Yerek's body, but blood also didn't spurt out as expected. Instead, the spear directly pierced through Yerek's back as if it had pierced through air. Only then did Lancelot realize that something was wrong. Afterimage. As soon as his voice fell, the figure of Yerek, whose chest was pierced, distorted and disappeared. After releasing the power of lightning and speed, Yerek could even create afterimages. In this regard, Lancelot only exclaimed, then suddenly raised the spear in his hand and swung it. The end of the spear was like a windmill, fiercely smashing into the space beside Lancelot. Bang! The spear body, which contained a powerful force, heavily smashed with a muffled sound. A figure appeared beside Lancelot without any warning, and was directly sent flying by the spear that smashed towards him. Ugh! Yerek could not help but let out a muffled groan. With electric sparks all over his body, he finally stabilized his body and landed on the ground with difficulty. As soon as he landed on the ground, Yerek immediately knelt on one knee, covered his chest, coughed a few times, and muttered somewhat gloomily. Sure enough, for me who is good at using the power of lightning and speed, the knight who can see through the lightning and speed is my biggest nemesis. Although this was what he said, Yerek still stood up with difficulty. Lancelot, who was riding on the white horse, turned around and looked condescendingly at Yerek, who was struggling to stand up, and said in a seemingly happy tone. Your speed is indeed quite outstanding, and you use it well. Unfortunately, if it's just speed, it won't be able to defeat me. I think so too, Yerek said very calmly, as if he could not see his own embarrassing state. Then, I'll play a little trick. After saying this, Yerek's body burst out with extremely bright electric sparks, and his body trembled violently. Immediately, under Lancelot's surprised gaze, two figures that looked exactly the same as Yerek split from his body. This is... Lancelot said with some surprise. Under such circumstances, Yerek, who was split into three, said in unison. My power is not only to enter the world of lightning and speed. For example, I can turn myself into lightning, eliminate my aura, conceal my movements, and so on. I can even create doppelgangers, just like this. As soon as he finished speaking, the three identical Yereks all turned into lightning, split into three directions, and suddenly shot toward Lancelot's direction. Looking at the three lightning bolts shooting toward him, Lancelot frowned. Chapter 1496. Shio. The sharp sound of something tearing through the air reverberated throughout the entire space. Under Lancelot's gaze, three bolts of lightning shot towards him at lightning speed. In just an instant, the 3 bolts of lightning abruptly arrived, filling Lancelot's entire field of vision with dazzling electric light. Under that kind of lightning speed, there was no point in competing in terms of speed. Therefore, Lancelot didn't even move his body, only allowing the pair of eyes under the helmet to stare unwaveringly at the 3 bolts of lightning that shot towards him. At some point, his pupils slightly contracted. Under the full effect of the mind's eye skill, Lancelot clearly saw it. Among the 3 bolts of lightning that shot towards him, one of them suddenly trembled slightly, the dazzling electric light on it also slightly weakened. The moment it weakened, the bolt of lightning transformed into a human, imprinting Yarek's grave and stern face into Lancelot's eyes. However, that didn't make Lancelot certain that it was Yarek's true body. Even so, Lancelot's heart didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation. Immediately, Lancelot raised the long spear in his hand. On the long spear, a burst of electric light suddenly flickered. Lancelot was also a user of lightning. As an adventurer and an explorer, Yarek had an extremely thorough understanding of the so-called steel. Therefore, Yarek knew that controlling lightning was the symbol of the most original steel. Therefore, the hero, who was known as the strongest steel, could also control lightning, and could even transform the god relics bestowed by the gods of the heavens into heavenly lightning that could save the world, carrying out an indiscriminate bombardment in all directions. Although Lancelot wasn't at the level of a hero, this knight was also the most original steel god. Naturally, Lancelot could also control lightning to a certain extent, and even manipulate the weather, turning himself into a mist, thus obtaining an immortal body. Thus, holding the long spear that flickered with electric light, Lancelot heavily stabbed the long spear in his hand amidst the sound of a strong wind, ruthlessly piercing Yarek, who had transformed from lightning into a human. Bang! A low explosive sound abruptly rang out at this moment. The long spear that flickered with electric light suddenly pierced Yarek, who had transformed from lightning into a human, causing his figure to abruptly shatter into pieces. Whang! In that instant, the other 2 bolts of lightning shuddered and also transformed into human figures. Their bodies were covered in electric sparks as they directly charged toward Lancelot's body. Dong! The thunderous explosion turned into a substantial shockwave that spread across the entire ground. Beep, beep, beep. Dazzling lightning exploded from the center of the impact, instantly turning the surrounding area within a few hundred meters into a pool of lightning, causing the ground to tremble. Immediately, arcs of lightning shot out from the pool of lightning like pythons, flashing across the ground at an extremely fast speed. Then, the 2 bolts of lightning seemed to be repelled by the rampaging lightning pool at the same time. They shot out from opposite ends of the lightning pool and heavily smashed into the ground not far away. Bang! The ground suddenly exploded, raising a cloud of sand and dust. After an unknown amount of time, the dust and lightning gradually subsided. In the 2 pits, Lancelot, who was riding on a white horse, and Yarek, whose body was flashing with electric arcs, appeared at the same time. The armor on one's body seemed to have become charred. The clothes on the other's body were tattered and covered in dust. Both of them were also in a sorry state. However, if one observed carefully, they would definitely be able to discover it. Although Lancelot's appearance was somewhat disheveled, his aura was not in any disorder. On the other hand, not only did the electric arcs flashing on Yarek's body weaken a lot, but he was also constantly gasping for breath. There was no need to explain who had the upper hand. As expected of the god-slaying demon king who can find a way to win under any circumstances. You're really amazing to be able to make dust stick to my armor even when I'm so restrained. Lancelot did not hide his admiration, but at the same time, there was a faint sense of regret in his tone. If possible, I really hope to continue fighting with you. However, it is not my style to show mercy in order to continue fighting. I will use my full strength and speed to charge forward. Black Prince, in your state, can you block my full blow? Hearing this, although Yarek was still gasping for breath, he laughed disdainfully. Block. That's not right. It should be my turn next. Lancelot was suddenly stunned. You've been dealing with me for a long time. Have you forgotten? Yerek sneered. Have you forgotten my goddess of vengeance? Lancelot's breath stopped. The goddess of vengeance. That was the power that Yerek had usurped from the three famous goddesses in Greek mythology, Alecto, Tisiphone, and Megala. In Greek mythology, Alecto, Tisiphone, and Megala were the goddesses of punishment. They were collectively known as the three goddesses of vengeance. According to legend, these three goddesses were three tall women with snake hair on their heads, bloody tears in their eyes, wings on their shoulders, torches in their hands, and snake whips in their hands. They were very terrifying. The three goddesses would chase humans who had committed the crime of murder on Earth, driving them mad. They were also responsible for carrying out punishment on the dead with sins in the underworld. They were the gods that the Greeks were most afraid of. It was the same as Luohao usurping the power of generals Heng-Ha and Heng-Ha. The power of the goddess of vengeance that Yerek had usurped came from the three goddesses who were a trinity. Only when the three of them were together could it be considered a complete divinity. With this power, Yerek would also have the right to take revenge on his enemies. He could spend a few minutes or even dozens of minutes to meditate and create the domain of vengeance. And when Yerek was in the domain of vengeance, all the attacks he received during this period would all be converted into the power of the three goddesses of vengeance and returned to the attacker without any change. Lancelot was also aware of the existence of this power. So, Lancelot said without any confusion. But I remember that this power requires the three goddesses to be summoned in advance, and after a certain period of meditation and ritual, it can only be used. It can't be used immediately in battle. Even if you use it now, as long as I withdraw from the domain of vengeance, this power will be useless. Withdraw from the domain of vengeance. Yerek suddenly laughed, and his laughter was unusually sarcastic. Haven't you realized that you've already stepped into my territory of vengeance and launched quite a few attacks? What? Lancelot was stunned at first, but then he finally understood and his expression changed abruptly. It can't be, you guessed right. Yerek suddenly raised his head. Long before you came here, I had already used the power of the goddess of vengeance to summon the three goddesses of vengeance and hid them underground. During this period of time, you will have a good taste of the attacks you launched against me. Yerek loudly chanted the spirit of words. Listen well, daughters of the eternal night, daughters of the earth and shadow. Under Yerek's spirit of words, the ground around him suddenly burst open, and three black shadows sprang out. They were three demonesses whose hair was all made up of snakes, and they had black wings like crows on their backs. Curb evil with evil, pay crime with crime, sacrifice blood with blood, pay tooth for tooth. This is the starting point of vengeance. The blood of the mother who was killed by the enemy, in the most tragic way to tell you that you can no longer repay your kindness. The three goddesses of vengeance surrounding Yerek had a bloody glint in their eyes as they stared at Lancelot. Demonis Morgella, Avenger Tisiphone, Alecto the Endless, quickly reflect the curse back and complete your revenge. Now is the time for vengeance. At this moment, a powerful curse power burst out from Yerek and the three goddesses. Lancelot didn't even have time to react before the space around him suddenly distorted. Immediately, all of Lancelot's previous attacks against Yerek were turned into invisible power by the three goddesses of vengeance, and violently surged in Lancelot's direction. Victory and defeat were also decided in a few seconds. Chapter 1497. Whoosh! 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 A series of piercing sounds resounded in the sky. It was the sound of all sorts of weapons shooting out like arrows. The relics that turned into light beams and the god relics that turned into lightning bolts shot out of the golden ripples and the gigantic Manchala formation respectively. They tore through the air and tore through space like a storm. They collided hard mid-air. Bang! 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 Each collision was a collision between myths and legends. Every time they clashed, it was a clash between legends. All sorts of legendary weapons that were famous in myths and legends had turned into arrows at the moment. They were shot at their opponents in the most violent and wasteful way as their owners squandered them. Whang! Every time a relic shot out from the golden ripples, turning into a beam of light and shooting towards the hero, the golden ripples would suddenly tremble, and new relic would be ejected one after another. Clang! Each time the god relic shot out of the gigantic Manchala formation and turned into lightning bolts that charged at Noah, the grids in the gigantic Manchala formation would glow and new god relics would appear one after another. Under such circumstances, Noah, who had golden ripples like water behind him, and the hero, who had a gigantic Manchala formation hovering behind him, stood in the air. They were not stingy at all as they unleashed their precious relics and god relics at each other. Undoubtedly, this was something that one would never see on a normal day. The reason being that the relics and god relics were charging at each other as if they were free. They collided with each other frequently, creating muffled explosions and scorching fire waves. The relics and god relics were mythical. Even the gods and heroes in all sorts of myths and legends would only own one of each relic and god relic under normal circumstances. However, it was such a weapon that allowed the gods and heroes to create their own legends. Nowadays, even the gods and heroes would only possess one mythical weapon under normal circumstances. They were all like worthless arrows that were thrown out by their owners one by one. What was squandering money like dirt? That was squandering money like dirt. However, both Noah and the hero had the right to squander money like that. Therefore, the battle fell into a stalemate. The hero who was holding the Savior Divine Sword looked at Noah who was throwing relics at him. His eyes flickered a few times. Subsequently, he let go of the Savior Divine Sword in his hand and allowed it to hover next to him. The hero extended his arm and took out a bow and arrow from one of the grids in the Manchala formation behind him. He held it in front of him and aimed it at Noah. He pulled the bowstring slowly. Bang! The arrow knocked on the bowstring immediately seemed to be on fire, exploding with an astonishing flame. Surya's arrow. Surya was the sun god in Hindu mythology. The undying hero Karna was his son. He was also the one who gave Karna the sun armor. Now, the hero took out the arrow given to him by Surya, the sun god in Hindu mythology, and shot the sun god's arrow. The flaming arrow suddenly swelled up in the wind, emitting a dazzling light. It was as if it had turned into a sun, rubbing against the air as it shot toward Noah. Looking at the bright and dazzling sun, Noah's face was as calm as an ancient well. He extended his arm and reached into a golden ripple behind him. In the next moment, a trident that seemed to be made of gold emerged from the golden ripple. Noah held it tightly in his hand and pulled it out. Swoosh! A surge of water suddenly appeared on the trident that seemed to be made of gold. Like two water dragons, they surrounded the body of the trident and gradually swelled. Poseidon's trident. In Greek mythology, the god of the sea was Poseidon. According to legend, when he was angry, huge waves would rise in the ocean and heavy rain would fall from the sky. Every inch of land on the continent would sink into the water and all life would be destroyed. The god of the sea's weapon was the trident. Using it, one could easily set off monstrous waves, storms, and tsunamis, sink the continent, and collapse the heavens and earth. Noah waved the trident in his hand toward the sun that was shooting toward him. The water around the trident suddenly exploded and turned into a monstrous wave. It surged out and covered the sky toward the sun that was shooting toward him. Amidst a bone-chilling sound, the sun was drowned by the monstrous waves. Half of the seawater was evaporated, and billowing steam filled the air, instantly covering the entire horizon. However, the remaining half of the seawater still surged out and mercilessly covered the direction of the hero. Looking at the monstrous wave, the hero's eyes narrowed. He released the bow in his hand and took out a new weapon from the mandala formation. It was a weapon called Vajra. Beep! 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 A burst of lightning flashed from the weapon. Vajra. The term Vajra was originally used to describe the lightning used by Sakra. Indra was the heavenly emperor in Hindu mythology, also known as Indra. He was the king of gods in Hindu mythology and also the god of war. Later on, he even joined Buddhism and became the guardian god of Buddhism along with Brahma, one of the three supreme gods in Hindu mythology. Vajra was Sakra's weapon. The black rabbit that no one knew was Sakra's family in the world of boxes. The god's persona weapon, Vajra replica, that he was using was a god's persona weapon that Sakra had given him. However, the hero was not using a god's persona weapon at the moment. Instead, he was using a real god's persona weapon that Indra had given him. The hero who was holding the Vajra replica lifted it above his head directly. The lightning flashing on it immediately surged. Tens of thousands of lightning bolts surged toward the monstrous wave that was surging toward him. Suddenly, the monstrous wave that was covered by tens of thousands of lightning bolts trembled. It was diminishing at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Soon, the monstrous wave was dissolved by the tens of thousands of lightning bolts before it could even reach the hero. It evaporated into the air and disappeared completely. The tens of thousands of lightning bolts continued to surge, like a gradually expanding pool of lightning. Like a tide, they surged in Noah's direction. Seeing that, Noah narrowed his eyes and extended his hand toward the golden ripples that looked like water waves next to him again. This time, a heavy hammer popped out of the golden ripples that looked like water waves. Noah held it tightly in his hand. Lightning bolts surged on it as well. Mjolnir. It was the weapon that was known as the most powerful in Norse mythology. Everyone knew that Odin was the main god of Norse mythology. He was also the king who ruled over the Norse gods. However, in Norse mythology, the most powerful god was not Odin, who was the main god, but Thor, who was known as the thunder god. The weapon that made Thor the invincible Mjolnir was the Mjolnir. In order to fight the king of gods in Hindu mythology, Indra the heavenly emperor's lightning, Noah used the most powerful weapon in Norse mythology, the thunder god's weapon. There was no hesitation at all. Noah raised the heavy hammer in his hand and swung it at the tens of thousands of lightning bolts that were attacking him. Pang! It was as if even space itself was smashed by the heavy hammer. Countless lightning bolts exploded from the heavy hammer. In the next second, tens of thousands of lightning bolts collided with the lightning pool formed by tens of thousands of lightning bolts. Rumble. Amidst the earth-shattering roar, the collision of lightning bolts burst into flames, causing a terrifying wave of fire to suddenly explode and cover the entire sky. Chapter 1498. Boom! A deafening explosion that was loud enough to shatter one's eardrums echoed through the sky. The sound of the explosion resounded across the sky, causing an extremely terrifying firestorm to sweep out from the clouds in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded to a radius of several hundred meters. The terrifying firestorm swept across the sky. The scorching temperature caused the air above the clouds to be extremely dry. The majestic wave of fire spread across the sky like a curtain of fire, occupying a large part of the sky. It distorted and blurred the space around it. The waves of fire were still churning like the waves of the sea, sweeping in all directions. One could faintly see lightning bolts shooting out from the center of the wave of fire, bringing about a series of thunderous roars. That scene was simply like a storm of thunder and fire mixed together, wreaking havoc above the clouds. The clouds below were dyed green and red, and the colors were constantly changing. It was believed that the so-called heaven and earth phenomenon must be referring to such a situation. Nobody knew how long the wave of fire and lightning wreaked havoc before the shocking commotion above the clouds gradually subsided. In the sky far away, the two silhouettes were still facing each other without moving. One of them had golden ripples behind him while the other had a magic square floating behind him. Their gazes met in midair. However, no matter if it was the golden ripple or the magic formation, there were no traces of the famous relics and god relics in all sorts of myths and legends on it. Of course, it was not because the demon king and the hero had used up all their treasures as they fought in the most extravagant way. The hero aside, Noah's Gate of Babylon had an automatic retrieval function. No matter how many relics Noah threw out, the valuable relics would be retrieved one by one. None of them would be left out. Therefore, Noah did not take out any relics because he felt that there was no need to continue. It was clear that the hero had the same thought. If it's just a competition of our weapons, there's no way we'll be able to determine the victor, Hero said with great admiration. For thousands of years, I've killed many demon kings, but I've never met an opponent like you. If it weren't for the weapons given to me by the gods in the heavens, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to defeat you. Why was Gilgamesh known as the strongest existence among the heroic spirits? The reason was simple. It was because the hero king had all the prototypes of relics since ancient times. And every heroic spirit had their own weaknesses and their own myths and legends. With all the noble phantasms, Gilgamesh could easily find the noble phantasms that targeted the weaknesses of his enemies and mercilessly kill them. Now, Noah and the hero were in the same situation. No matter what kind of relics Noah used, the hero would be able to find a god relic that targeted it from his treasure vault. No matter what kind of god relic the hero took out, Noah would be able to find a relic that could defeat it from his treasure vault. Both of them were not competing with strength, but wealth. In the end, no one would know who had the better collection unless they continued to compete. However, regardless of whether it was Noah or the hero, they did not have the patience to continue competing with the amount of items they had in their treasure vaults. Therefore, both of them stopped fighting at the same time. The golden ripples and the gigantic Manchala formation behind them disappeared as if they had never existed in the first place. Noah then spoke coldly. If this continues, I'm afraid there'll be no end to it. I don't have that much time to play with you. Me too. I must complete my mission as soon as possible and fall into a deep slumber again, the hero agreed and suggested. In my opinion, from now on, let's not use weapons to attack each other. Let's just use force to determine the victor. Noah raised his brow when he heard that. He looked at the hero with a faint smile. That's easy for you to say. Even if you don't use the weapons given to you by the gods in the heavens, you still have the powerful divine sword. As for me, are you going to let me fight the divine sword that saved the world with my bare hands? There's nothing I can do about it. This saber is like a part of me, the warrior said, shaking his head. Although I still have the support of the ancient treaty, if I lose the divine sword, my strength will be greatly reduced. When that happens, I definitely won't be able to defeat you. That's why I have no choice but to use the divine sword. This really surprises me. Noah looked at the hero with some surprise. Undoubtedly, you have the support of the ancient treaty. You have the strength of 7 godslayers. Do you really think that you won't be able to defeat a single godslayer without the divine sword? I also find it unbelievable, but that's what I feel. The hero looked at Noah with an extremely serious expression. I can feel that you're different from the other godslayers. Your strength is beyond my imagination. Without the divine sword, I definitely won't be able to defeat you. Noah couldn't help but look at him in a new light when he heard the resolute and decisive words of the warrior. Your senses are very sharp, Noah said indifferently. That's right. The way I see it, if you don't have the divine sword, even if you have the support of the ancient treaty, you definitely won't be a threat. That's why I won't give up on the divine sword. The hero nodded calmly. Since you also have 1,000 weapons, you should be able to find a weapon that can rival my divine sword in your collection, right? The hero's words made Noah's mouth fall open slightly. Just as Noah was about to say something, a voice suddenly rang out in his mind. Noah's face froze. Then, his eyes lit up and he suddenly smiled. You're right. My Aster won't lose to your divine sword that saved the world. As soon as he finished speaking, a crisscrossing sword mark on the back of Noah's hand emitted a blinding light. The dazzling light that blossomed from the elven engraving surged like a tide. Within it, a petite girl with long silver hair that reached her waist and a mysterious aura appeared. That's... The hero was a little surprised. Aster. Noah looked at the elven girl that appeared in the light. His tone became more or less excited. You're finally awake. Noah's voice made the elven girl that appeared in the light slowly open her eyes and stare at Noah. In those eyes, there was a sense of mystery that could be easily seen by others. Also, there was a strong sense of attachment that could only be seen by Noah. Master, with a soft call, Aster floated out of the light and followed the pull of gravity towards Noah. Noah opened his arms towards the elven girl that descended from the sky. With a gentle movement, he embraced Aster who was leaping into his arms and chanted. Cold Steel Queen, holy sword that slays demons and demons, turn into a sword of steel and bestow me with divine power. It was an incantation that was written in a completely different language. Even the hero didn't know that in this world, only Noah knew the elven language. In the midst of the incantation, the elven girl that leaped into Noah's arms slowly closed her eyes. Her whole body disintegrated into light particles and gathered in Noah's palm. Then, the silver holy sword gradually took shape and was tightly held in Noah's hand. Clang! A dazzling light blossomed from the silver holy sword. It was comparable to the light of the sun, a brilliant white light that illuminated the entire cloud. The hero widened his eyes slightly and tightened his grip on the divine blade of salvation. Clang! The divine blade of salvation suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light, as if it was trying to fight for the space occupied by the brilliant white light. The platinum light instantly surged in all directions like waves. Holding the silver holy sword tightly, Noah closed his eyes. Aster, with your power, can you win against that divine blade? No problem. Aster's voice that didn't have any confusion or emotion sounded in Noah's mind. With Master's current power, as long as you can perfectly control my power, you can defeat that divine blade. That's a reliable declaration. Noah's lips slowly curled up. Then, Aster, let's go. I am Master's sword. Aster said without hesitation. As you wish. Chapter 1499. In the box, in order to help Letitia escape from the Demon King game, Noah used the Dragon Emperor transformation ability to multiply Aster's power, causing Aster to fall into a deep sleep. However, it wasn't because Aster couldn't bear the enormous power that caused him to fall into a deep sleep. Instead, it was because the power multiplied stimulated Aster's own power, causing Aster to enter an awakened state. As the strongest sword spirit in the elemental world, Aster was once feared by the 5 elven kings and the Dark Elven King. In other words, this sword spirit's power could even threaten the elven kings who controlled the world's elements. Naturally, not just anyone could wield such great power. Sometimes, if the power of a contracted spirit was too great, to the point that the elven master couldn't control it, then after the contract was formed, the contracted spirit's power would be limited to a certain extent. This was just like the subordination contract in the box. In the box, if the power of the enslaved party was too great, then the enslaved party's power would decrease, to the extent that the enslaved party would be unable to control the enslaved party. The situation between Luos and the demon star spirit Argel was a good example of this. This situation also applied between an elven master and a contracted spirit. If the contracted spirit's power was far beyond what the elven master could control, then the contracted spirit's power would decrease, and it wouldn't be strange if he couldn't control it. When he formed the contract with Aster, Noah was only a newly minted elven master. Although he had great power, as an elven master, he was only a rookie. Naturally, he couldn't draw out much power from the strongest sword spirit during the contract. In view of this, after concluding the contract, Noah and Aster would often hone each other's tacit understanding in private and improve the abilities of the elves, hoping that one day they would be able to draw out Aster's power that even the elven king feared. Now, this moment had finally arrived. The moment he held the demon slayer, Noah felt the difference from before. As Noah imbued the demon slayer in his hand with a huge amount of divine might, an unprecedented amount of divine might was also fed back to him. Under such circumstances, Noah could clearly feel the power of the demon slayer in his hand. Sharpness, hardness, accuracy, and even explosiveness had all undergone a qualitative improvement. What's more, even the demon slayer's ability to break curses had reached a terrifying level. Holding the demon slayer tightly, Noah took a deep breath and instantly converted half of the energy in his body into divine might and the other half into divine power. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now, I shall obtain the majesty of 10 mountains, the strength of 100 rivers, and the strength of 1,000 giant dragons. The majestic me shall raise the ferocious power to slay dragons. Deep in Noah's heart, the stone plate floating in the cosmic sea turned and pointed at the incarnation of the dragon emperor. A crimson wave of air rose from Noah's body and turned into the phantom of a crimson dragon. Boost, 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 boost. Above the phantom of the crimson dragon, the jade gems lit up one after another and released voices, causing a surge of power to flow through Noah's body and release an incomparably powerful aura. Sensing that Noah's aura was becoming more and more powerful, the hero's eyes became serious. Immediately, the hero raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand and pointed it high into the sky. Hum! Accompanied by a trembling sound, a blinding light bloomed from the divine blade of salvation. It soared into the sky and gradually condensed. Not long after, the blinding light from the divine blade of salvation turned into a small sun, illuminating the entire sky. Noah had seen that move once before. It was the same move that the hero had used to sink the entire invisible island when he had just awakened. Legend had it that the divine blade of salvation had the power to cut even stars. That legend was referring to this move. The hero's divine blade of salvation that had annihilated the demon king not only combined the forms of the weapons that the gods of the heavens had given it, but it was also one with the hero. It was like a divine relic that was part of the hero's body. Therefore, apart from being able to release the Manchala formation, this divine blade also had two abilities that were closely related to the hero. The other was the same as the original, steel, the ability to release lightning. This ability was the so-called lightning of salvation. The other was the same as the steel god. It could extract a large amount of energy from the earth and turn it into an attack that could cut stars. This ability was called the light of salvation. Now, the hero was using the second ability. Divine blade that is connected to my life, show the light of salvation and bring peace to the world. The hero chanted the sacred words and stepped into the void. He raised the divine blade in his hand and pointed it at the small sun above him. Like a god holding up the sun, he shook his arm and suddenly swung it down. In an instant, the sun that was shining brightly was like a huge meteor of light that fell from the sky. It rubbed against the air, and even the edges of its outline were flashing with red flames. It fell furiously in Noah's direction. Bang, 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 bang. Wherever the dazzling sun passed, the air would explode. Even the clouds below were shattered in an instant. It was as if the real sun had fallen. With unparalleled power, it suppressed Noah's direction. Raising his head, Noah looked at the scene that resembled the falling sun. His robes fluttered in the strong wind, but a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Clang! Gorgeous white light spread out from the holy sword in Noah's hand like a tide. Holding the holy sword that was also blooming with blinding light, but the light was not platinum. It was pure white. Noah fiercely stepped into the void. With a dong sound, his whole body rushed up and rushed toward the falling platinum sun. The brilliant white light that bloomed from the holy sword covered Noah's whole body with a layer of light. From afar, it looked like a comet that shot into the sky and violently shot toward the falling platinum sun. The scene was extremely shocking. In this way, the comet that shot into the sky directly hit the platinum sun. It was at this moment that a clear voice reverberated in the air. Absolute sword skill. Formbreaker ardent flower spiral sword dance 36 consecutive strikes. As soon as the voice fell, it heavily hit the front of the comet that was above the platinum sun, and a burst of sword light flashed. Clang, 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 clang. Amidst the crisp sword sound, streaks of sword light flashed across the surface of the platinum sun like a storm. They swept past the platinum sun at a speed faster than the speed of sound. The slash that turned into a sword light cut the platinum sun into countless petals, causing the falling platinum sun to suddenly stop in midair and collapse completely. An earth-shattering roar resounded. The platinum sun exploded in the sky, turning into light particles that scattered in all directions. What? The hero was shocked. An attack that could even cut a star was actually cut open. While the hero was still in shock, the comet that heavily hit the platinum sun in the sky suddenly turned and cut through the space. It was as fast as lightning, blowing away the light particles that filled the sky and rushing toward the hero. Only then did the hero react. Looking at the comet that was violently shooting toward him, he quickly raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand. Clang! The crisp sound of metal clashing reverberated clearly in the sky. The holy sword and the divine blade that were blooming with blinding light collided with each other, causing a dazzling flash. Beep, beep, beep. Immediately after, amidst the sound of thunder, the bright electric light on the divine blade surged violently to the holy sword. Chapter 1500. Beep. 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 Amidst the ear-piercing sound of electricity, bolts of lightning exploded on the divine blade of salvation. They were like pythons that instantly slithered onto the holy sword's blade. However, when the bolts of lightning that slithered onto the holy sword's blade came into contact with the brilliant white light of the demon slayer, they evaporated like water vapor and instantly turned into a wisp of green smoke amidst sizzling sounds. Seeing this happen, the hero was also extremely shocked. Even the lightning of salvation is ineffective. I'm sorry, Noah looked up and sneered when he saw the shock in the hero's eyes. My Aster has an extremely powerful ability to break curses. Now that I've fully unleashed my power, I can even break the powers of gods and gods' layers one by one, including the divine blade in your hand. As soon as he finished speaking, Noah suddenly dodged and took a step back. A huge amount of divine power gathered under his feet, and it exploded again. Ultimate sword skill. Primary form purple lightning. Noah, who had just taken a small step back, turned into a bolt of lightning in an instant. The holy sword in his hand, which was glowing with a brilliant white light, pierced towards the hero's chest mercilessly. The hero had no time to be surprised. He almost reflexively dodged to the side. Chee! The lightning-like spike immediately brushed past the side of the brave man's chest, cutting through his clothes and landing in the air. The hero could even clearly feel the cold touch in front of him, proving that the holy sword had pierced through his skin. If the hero's dodge had been even 0.1 second slower, there would have been a gash in front of him. If it had been anyone else in such a thrilling situation, they would have felt a chill in their heart. However, the hero was an expert who had annihilated all the gods' layers since ancient times. He felt his heart tighten, and a burst of violent lightning erupted from his body. Clang! Although the burst of lightning did not reach the silver holy sword, it bounced the holy sword away from the hero's body. Then, the hero took a step forward and raised the divine blade in his hand. Like a windmill dancing in the wind, he heavily slashed toward Noah's waist. Clang! This time, it was Noah's turn to raise the holy sword in his hand. With a crisp sound, he blocked the divine blade's heavy slash. As the saying goes, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and violence for violence. As if intending to return the favor, Noah also made the crimson dragon's shadow on his body soar, causing the airwave that turned into air scales to be like a shockwave, blasting it away. Bang! Amidst the muffled sounds, the hero was struck by the crimson shockwave and was sent flying. However, at that moment, the hero kicked Noah in the chest. Bang! With the same muffled sound, Noah, who had ignited his air scales, could not block the hero's kick. He was sent flying. Thus, one was sent flying by the air scales, while the other was sent flying by the kick. Noah and the hero were both sent flying, creating a sharp sound that reverberated in the sky. It did not dissipate for a long time. However, almost at the same time, Noah and the hero steadied themselves and looked up. Their eyes met in the air, and sparks flew. Then, Noah and the hero both stomped on the void and shot out like bullets. They swung their holy sword and divine blade at each other. Clang! The crisp sound of collision was mixed with a shock wave that spread out like a ripple. Clang, 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 clang. In the sky, two figures crisscrossed each other like two bolts of lightning chasing after each other. As they flashed and flew, they collided with each other frequently, causing the sound of steel colliding to spread out like water ripples. It also set off waves of shocking wind ripples, causing people to be terrified just by looking at them. Looking from afar, one could only see two meteors chasing each other. Sometimes they wandered in the sky. Sometimes they collided ruthlessly. Sometimes they flashed through space. Sometimes they intertwined with each other. Under such circumstances, the holy sword and the divine saber clashed repeatedly, causing the crisp sounds of clashing to resound through the sky. At the same time, they also cut through the air. Every time they clashed, the surrounding atmosphere would become chaotic, and their momentum could not be said to be small. As a result, after a round of confrontation, the hero who was attacking the Demon King and the Demon King who was attacking the hero were evenly matched. Neither side could do anything to the other. In terms of physical strength, Noah and the hero were actually on par. Noah had the blessing of ability value that was about to be promoted to LV6. In terms of physical strength, he was not inferior to a god. The hero was the strongest, steel, so his physical strength was naturally extraordinary. He was not inferior to Noah at all. In terms of weapons, Noah had the holy sword that even the elf king was afraid of, and the hero had the divine blade that could even cut a star. In terms of the level of strength, Noah's incarnation of the Dragon Emperor had multiplied to the limit, and the hero had also used the ancient covenant to increase the strength equivalent to 7 god slayers. In terms of defense, Noah had the air scale protection, and the hero also had the thunder lightning protection. In terms of skills, Noah's sword skills were superb, and the hero was not inferior to Noah. In this way, the two of them were naturally on par with each other. Of course, Noah could also use 2 incarnations to fight at the same time. However, at present, Noah had already used the dragon sun's sovereignty to strengthen his physical strength, and not to strengthen his spirit. Once he used 2 incarnations, without the dragon sun's sovereignty to strengthen his spirit, even if Noah could bear the burden of using 2 incarnations at the same time, he could not guarantee how long he could bear the burden of using 2 incarnations. And if the dragon sun's sovereignty was used to strengthen his spirit, Noah's strength would be reduced by more than half in an instant. In that case, without the support of enough divine power, Aster's true strength would not be able to be displayed. At that time, the divine blade that could cut a star would become a threat. Therefore, unless it was the most critical moment, casually using the power of 2 incarnations would only lead to one's death. Until the time came to determine the outcome of the battle, Noah had to hide this trump card with a time limit. Clang! Another heavy sound of steel colliding rang out. The two figures that had turned into two meteors chasing each other passed by each other, retreating rapidly in the ripples of the strong wind. Their eyes were fixed on each other, not moving for a moment. In a battle of such intensity, it would only take a moment to shift one's gaze away from one's opponent, and one would be forced into a desperate situation. Therefore, Noah and the hero had their eyes fixed on each other. Their eyes were filled with seriousness and light. At that moment, the hero's face froze all of a sudden. He flipped his hand, and a golden disc appeared in his hand. Noah's eyes focused as he looked at the disc. Of course, Noah would not forget about the disc. It was the god relic that stored the sword god's summoning authority called the arrowhead disc. It seemed like after Guinevere's death, the god relic had returned to its rightful owner, the hero. After all, the sword god's summoning authority stored in the god relic was the hero's authority. No matter if it was Noah or the hero, both of them had their eyes on the arrowhead disc at that moment. Then, both of them noticed something. Two brand new sword seals slowly appeared on the disc and were imprinted on it. The hero fell silent for a moment as he looked at the two sword seals that were slowly appearing. Both of them have been defeated. Noah understood what was going on when he heard that. Lancelot and the masked wind god had been defeated by Luohao and Yerek. However, that was not good news. The reason being, Lancelot and the masked wind god's godheads must have been absorbed by the arrowhead disc. Therefore, one could already foresee what would happen next. Just like how Noah was hiding his trump card, the hero was hiding his trump card as well. It seems like I can't drag this on any longer. The hero looked at Noah. Although it's a little unfair, this disc is also my authority and my power. So, please forgive me. The golden disc flashed with a bright light as soon as he was done speaking. In the next second, four silhouettes appeared around the hero out of thin air. Noah's expression turned grim when he saw that. Chapter 15:01. Looking at the group of people who appeared out of thin air around the hero and surrounded him as if they wanted to protect him, Noah could not help but be speechless. The four of them could be regarded as Noah's acquaintances. One of them was a handsome man riding on a winged celestial horse. One was ape deity who was riding on a golden cloud. One was a knight riding on a handsome white horse. One was wind god, who was surrounded by whirlwinds and was covered in bandages. He also wore a mask on his face. Perseus. Great sage, heaven's equal. Lancelot. Masked wind god. The group of four gods of disobedience surrounded the hero and cast their gazes on Noah. Godslayer. Perseus revealed a smile that was as refreshing as the sun. We meet again. I didn't expect that I would have the chance to fight with you again. Great sage, heaven's equal laughed heartily. It couldn't be better. As expected, I was resurrected along with him. Lancelot spun the long spear in his hand and spoke with some helplessness and some joy. It's a little despicable for a dead person to use this method to come back to life, but there's no other way. Apart from being an invincible warrior, I'm also a servant who protects my master. Let me fulfill my duty as well. Only masked wind god looked at Noah silently. In order to protect the secret of the hero, he firmly pursued the doctrine of mysticism. Waves of powerful curse power surged out from the gods, and like invisible waves, they spread out in layers. Noah's excellent sensing ability allowed him to clearly feel the powerful curse power surging from the four gods of disobedience, including Perseus, great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and masked wind god. Almost every wave of curse power was 100 times stronger than that of an ordinary magician or conjurer. However, it was precisely because of this that Noah frowned slightly. It was not because the curse power of the four gods of disobedience was too strong. On the contrary, the curse power that surged from Perseus, great sage equaling heaven, Lancelot, and the masked wind god was much weaker than before. This result made Noah's heart skip a beat. Could it be, as expected, I can't hide anything from you? The hero had been observing Noah's performance, and when he saw the surprise on his face, he sighed. Although I have the power to resurrect my own kind and summon steel again, this power is not without limits. The strength of the steel generals that you resurrected has decreased, right? Noah nodded in understanding. That's right. That makes sense. Otherwise, if you could resurrect your dead brethren in their complete states, you could gather combat power and annihilate the Godslayer with sheer numbers. There's no need for any ancient treaty or the divine blade of salvation. You're right, the hero admitted. If only one is resurrected, then his strength can be restored to its peak. However, if there are more of them, the power will be dispersed. In their current state, they probably only have 70% of their strength when they were alive, right? Noah's gaze swept across the gods that were supporting the hero, 70% of their strength, but there are 4 more of them. It's a very useful power, isn't it? That's why I'm using this power. The hero nodded solemnly, and then his gaze swept across the 4 gods of disobedience around him. Everyone, please lend me your power. You want to use my power to conquer the Demon King. My savior. Perseus pulled out his saber from his waist in a forthright manner. Although I don't like to be ordered around, there's no other way in this situation. Old son, I have no objections. Great sage equaling heaven flipped his hand, and the Rui Jingu Bang appeared in his hand. Since you've given me a chance to kill my enemy, then I'll lend you some of my power. Wielding a spear for my lord is Lancelot's long-cherished wish, Lancelot declared loudly. To be able to run at full speed once again, I'm satisfied. Masked wind god clenched his fist without saying a word, causing the whirlwind around him to become even more violent. At this moment, the 4 gods of steel locked their hostility on Noah. Looking at Noah, who was holding the silver holy sword, the hero spoke in a low voice. Don't hate me. As soon as he finished speaking. What are you waiting for? Great sage equaling heaven shouted. Do it. As soon as he finished speaking, the 4 gods of steel suddenly shot out. Almost at the same time, Noah retreated without hesitation, trying his best to distance himself from the 4 gods of disobedience. However, that was meaningless. This was because Excellency Ape, who was stepping on a golden cloud, and Wind God, whose body was surging with a storm, had released the power of seraphic speed at the first moment. With a terrifying speed that no one could match, they turned into phantoms and flashed in front of Noah in an instant. God Slayer. Great sage equaling heaven shouted loudly. Have a taste of the power of old son's Rui Jingu Bang. Before he could finish his sentence, the great sage equaling heaven's steel rod, which weighed 13,500 pounds, was like a heavy mountain. With a swing, it was aimed at Noah's head. At the same time, masked wind god also raised a huge fist, which was swirling with a whirlwind to the extreme. Like a cannonball, it was heavily aimed at Noah's chest. The power of the steel rod and the fist shook the air, causing a heavy sonic boom to sound in the air. Even if such a blow landed on steel, it would be able to shatter it in an instant. Looking at the steel rod and the fist, which contained terrible power, smashing towards him, Noah finally had to take it seriously. I am the strongest, and I hold all victory in my hands. Whether it is a human or a demon, I am the one who defeats the hostility of all enemies. I will defeat any enemy that is in my way. The holy words of the God of victory, who was always victorious, turned into a spirit of speech, causing all the divine power that were sleeping in Noah's energy source to boil. Bang! The red air scales that covered Noah's whole body suddenly rose, like a dragon-shaped armor, protecting Noah in it. Dong! The steel rod and the heavy fist fell on the red air scales, causing a circle of ripples. At this time, Perseus, who was riding on the back of the celestial horse, and Lancelot, who was riding on the back of the white horse, had somehow circled behind Noah and galloped towards him. "Don't forget about me. I can finally fight with you. I have been waiting for this day for a long time." With extremely passionate shouts, Perseus and Lancelot whipped their horses and charged towards Noah's back at an extremely fast speed. Swoosh! The sword in Perseus' hand cut through the wind and slashed towards Noah's neck in an extremely heroic manner. Whoosh! The long spear in Lancelot's hand pierced out explosively, piercing towards Noah's back amidst the sharp sound of the air being torn apart. Feeling the strong wind coming from behind, Noah was just about to react when another piercing sound resounded in front of him. 3 arrows turned into flaming light beams and streaked across the sky. At an extremely tricky angle, they brushed past the bodies of the great sage, heaven's equal and the masked wind god, who were blocking in front of Noah, and shot towards Noah. That arrow was shot by the brave warrior who was guarding the rear with his longbow. Furthermore, each and every one of those arrows contained the power of the ancient covenant. Noah had reason to believe that those arrows could break through the air scales on his body. At that time, the attacks of Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god would all fall on Noah and kill him. This made Noah somewhat angry. "Don't be too arrogant." The silver holy sword that was held tightly in Noah's hand suddenly shone brightly. Ultimate sword skill. Form 3 Dance of the shadow moon. A full moon suddenly expanded like a crescent arc. With Noah's sudden rotation, it suddenly appeared and swept towards the surroundings. Clang! The sudden appearance of the moonlight heavily bounced off the attacks of the 4 disobedient gods and sent the people surrounding Noah flying. Chapter 1502. Oh. Wah. Goo. Under the moonlight slash, Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god all let out miserable cries as they were sent flying in 4 different directions. Whoosh! However, the 3 flaming arrows shot by the hero still shot straight towards Noah's throat, heart, and abdomen, landing on the air scales on Noah's body. Bang! With a muffled explosion, the 3 flaming arrows, which were supported by the power of the ancient covenant, suddenly exploded the air scales on Noah's body, causing the crimson dragon shadow that overlapped on Noah's body to disappear, revealing his body. With the disappearance of the crimson dragon silhouette, the torrential energy flowing through Noah's body abruptly weakened and finally disappeared. That power was multiplied by the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear. Relying on this multiplied power, Noah was able to compete with the hero, who was supported by the ancient covenant and had the power of 7 godslayers. Now, the multiplied power had all disappeared, allowing Noah to return to his normal state. However, that was to be expected. The crimson dragon shadow on Noah's body was originally the product of the fusion of the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear's balance breaker and the Dragon Emperor's incarnation's chi scale. Originally, the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear's balance breaker was supposed to be a crimson red full body armor. However, after the fusion with Noah's Dragon Emperor incarnation, the balance breaker of the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear also fused with the air scales. After the gas scales fused with the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear's balance breaker, the result was that the crimson full body armor turned into a crimson gaseous armor. Now that the crimson dragon's shadow had been destroyed, it was equivalent to the balance breaker effect of the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear being destroyed as well. Naturally, the increased power would disappear. Feeling that the powerful aura on Noah's body had decreased several times in an instant, the hero with the longbow immediately ordered. Now! Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god, who were sent flying by the moonlight slash, instantly increased the power of the curse in their bodies. Then, the four of them stabilized their bodies and once again charged in the direction of Noah. The four gods of disobedience who were sent flying in four different directions suddenly rushed in from all directions and surrounded Noah. He believed that as long as the four gods of disobedience got close, they would launch the fiercest attack at the same time. At that time, even if Lancelot and the others only had 70% of their peak strength left, without the multiplied power of the Dragon Emperor and without the protection of the Dragon Emperor's air scales, the best outcome for Noah would be to be a serious injury. Once the air scales were broken, a buffer period would be needed to recover. At this time, Noah could not immediately use the multiplied power and air scales ability. However, that did not mean that Noah could not use the power of the other incarnations. I, with my violent heart, tightly cover the sky. I declare, roll up a storm for me, rain for me, and never allow you to disobey my orders. In the depths of Noah's heart, the image representing the storm lit up. Dong! Accompanied by a thunderous sound, a storm shook out from Noah's body and turned into the most violent tornado. Like a shock wave, it blew in all directions at an extremely fast speed. Perseus, great sage equaling heaven, Lancelot, and the masked wind god who were charging toward Noah were all shocked. But it was too late to react at this time. The violent tornado completely engulfed the four gods of disobedience. Bang! At this time, a crimson wave of air rose from Noah's body and turned into a dragon's shadow that overlapped with his body. The air scales were finally restored. At this moment, Noah finally used two incarnations at the same time. On the crimson dragon's shadow, the precious gems began to emit voices, allowing the multiplied power to be channeled into the violent tornado that was stirred up by the tremors. The violent tornado suddenly trembled, and its color gradually turned red. Like a volcanic eruption, it caused an incomparably ferocious and terrifying power to fluctuate in the wind. The sudden increase in power of the tornado instantly turned into the most brutal power, and every gust of wind became a heavy pressure. The four gods of disobedience were swallowed by the tornado. Before they could even scream, they were instantly crushed by the terrifying power of the tornado, leaving not a trace of flesh behind. What? The hero's expression finally changed abruptly. At this moment, the crimson storm howled and expanded like a giant tornado, rushing in the direction of the hero. The hero's expression changed again and again, and he hurriedly manipulated the spirit supporting his body. Like a fallen leaf in a gust of wind, he retreated rapidly with the help of the gust of wind to avoid the terrifying tornado that was roaring toward him. However, with the multiplied power of the Dragon Emperor, the strength of the storm incarnation increased by too much. Therefore, the terrifying crimson tornado expanded faster and faster, and it didn't take long for it to catch up with the hero. Hiya! The hero, who couldn't avoid it, could only shout. He raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand and tightly gripped the hilt with both hands. Then, he slashed down heavily at the tornado that was sweeping toward him. Clang! The light of salvation bloomed on the divine blade of salvation. The blade, which could even cut stars in half, was like a flash of light as it slashed through the outer wall of the tornado. Poochie! With a tearing sound, the tornado that could be easily crushed by Perseus, the great sage, heaven's equal, Lancelot, and the masked wind god was actually split in half by the divine blade of salvation. However, the hero didn't feel any joy at all. His pupils suddenly shrank to the size of needles. Amidst the piercing sound of something breaking through the air, a figure shot out from the storm that had been split in half. Like an arrow that had been released from a bow, the figure rushed in front of the hero. You! The hero's eyes widened. There, Noah's dark and deep eyes flashed with a fierce light. He raised the holy sword in his hand and mercilessly slashed down at the hero. Looking at the sharp blade that was getting closer and closer, the hero shouted again at the critical moment. His body surged with bright electric light. Poochie! With a crisp tearing sound, Noah's sword split the dazzling electric light that burst from the hero's body, just like how the hero had cut the tornado in half. Then, looking at the hero whose pupils shrank, Noah suddenly clenched his fists. Giant that blots out the sky supports the world with his hand. I will let this divine power flow into my body. From now on, I will display the ultimate power that no one can match. At this moment, among the powers of Noah's 10 incarnations, the most powerful one, the giant, flashed with light. The power that could split mountains and seas instantly filled Noah's body. There was no hesitation. Noah's arms suddenly shook, and he blasted a fist with terrifying power at the hero. Bam! A deafening sound that made one's heart tremble exploded in the sky. Poochie! The terrifying power caused the hero to spit out a mouthful of blood. His entire chest was smashed, and his body was like a broken piece of trash. He hung down powerlessly and fell from the high clouds to the ground with the help of gravity. Chapter 1503. Shio. High up in the clouds, the sound of a meteor crashing resounded. A figure was like a kite with a broken string, penetrating through the clouds and turning into a meteorite that created sparks due to friction with the air. It fell back down at a terrifying speed that was above the speed of sound. In the end, the figure that turned into a meteorite heavily smashed into a beach. Bang! In the loud muffled explosion, a corner of the beach stirred up a thick cloud of sand, mixed with a violent impact wind, violently spreading in all directions. At this time, Noah finally descended from the sky and landed on the beach. Ugh! Just as he landed on the beach, Noah's face showed traces of pain, causing him to involuntarily hold his head and let out a painful groan. This was caused by using 2 avatars at the same time, which caused his mind to bear an excessive burden. It was just as Noah had expected. Without the blessing of the dragon sun sovereign, using 2 avatars at the same time, even if the physical burden could be completely ignored with the ability value that was about to reach LV6, the mental burden was not. At this time, Noah felt like a live iron rod drilled into his head, very uncomfortable. Seeing Noah's appearance, Ashtar's voice involuntarily rang in Noah's mind. Master, I'm fine. Noah held his head, took a deep breath, and said so. Fortunately, using 2 avatars at the same time did not take a long time. It was just a little painful, but the burden was not too big. Ashtar, who was connected to Noah's mind, could easily sense that Noah was not lying, so he was relieved. Noah, who felt the pain slightly lessen, let out a sigh of relief, raised his head, and looked forward. There, the thick sand and dust that accompanied the shockwave began to gradually dissipate, revealing the scene within the sand and dust. A huge crater sat in the sand and dust, with gravel and stones rolling inside. In the middle of the crater, the hero lay there, spitting out mouthfuls of blood. The hero seemed to want to stand up, but did not succeed. This was because he couldn't even move a single finger. He took a closer look. The warrior's chest had caved in completely. That was definitely a fatal wound. It was a fatal wound that even a god could not escape. After all, even though Noah did not reveal himself and was unable to display the full power of the giant form, with the support of the giant form, Noah's full power attack was something that even 16 knights, who had broken the rules of the physical ability of the giant form, would not be able to match. Even a mountain would crumble in an instant after being hit by such a blow, let alone a body. Even though the hero was a god, being hit by such a blow was undoubtedly a fatal blow. Rather, it would be more accurate to say that the brave warrior was still able to struggle at death's door even when his chest was completely caved in. His fatality was already very tenacious. However, there was no doubt. The brave ones could no longer fight. Cough, cough. The warrior coughed up blood continuously. Due to his heavy injuries, he was unable to move at all. However, the warrior gritted his teeth and raised his head to look in Noah's direction. Noah met the hero's gaze and remained silent. Under such circumstances, the hero tried his best to squeeze out a smile. This time, "I have indeed lost." The hero's voice was extremely weak. It was so weak that if the wind was slightly stronger and the distance was slightly further, it would have been impossible to hear. However, Noah heard it clearly. He heard the hero's words. "But, this is only temporary." The hero stared at Noah closely. "I will be back." Leaving behind this sentence, it was unclear whether it was advice or a warning. The hero slowly closed his eyes and lowered his head. The next moment, the hero's body flashed with a platinum light and turned into the shape of a sword. Clang! With a crisp sound, the sword that was blooming with platinum light fell from mid-air and the tip of the sword was embedded in the ground. That was naturally the divine blade of salvation. Noah furrowed his brows tightly as he looked at the divine saber that was stuck in the pit. The blade was radiating platinum light. It was not until this moment that Noah finally remembered. Athena had once said that the brave had an extremely powerful immortality. Even if he defeated the hero would only transform into the divine blade and enter a dormant state. In a few months, or as long as a few years, the hero would revive and wake up from his dormant state. When that happened, Noah would have to face this troublesome hero again. "Aster," Noah said with a frown. "Can you cut that divine blade in half?" "I'm not sure." Aster's voice sounded in Noah's mind again. "However, I don't feel like I can cut it in half, so there shouldn't be a way." "There shouldn't be a way." Noah's frown deepened. "Even if I use the incarnation of the Dragon Emperor to increase your power, it still won't work." "I don't think so." It was rare for Aster to say something without confidence. "Although I don't know the nature of the sword, as a sword spirit, I can feel that it's immortal." Noah's tightly furrowed brows immediately loosened, and a troubled expression appeared on his face. In reality, Noah had already guessed that. After all, immortal god relics were not rare at all. Back then, wasn't Noah also unable to destroy the Holy Grail and retrieve the world fragment from it? That sacred magic tool was an undying and indestructible type. Since even the Holy Grail, which was created for the sake of the brave, was immortal, then it was not strange that the divine blade of salvation, which was known as the strongest divine relic, could be immortal and indestructible, which was formed from countless weapons given to the brave by the gods of the heavenly realm. Otherwise, if the divine blade could be easily destroyed, the hero would not have been able to successfully kill the demon king and complete his mission. Could it be that there was no way to deal with the divine blade of salvation? Just when Noah was feeling helpless, a voice rang in his mind. "I've told you that you can't defeat that man." The voice did not belong to Aster. Noah was startled for a moment, and then he was surprised. "Athena, you're awake." "Even if an immortal snake goes into hibernation, it will wake up in spring," Athena said calmly and arrogantly. "With this characteristic, I've decided to wake up before I went into hibernation. It's either when you're killed by that man or when you're defeated by him. I'll only wake up when these two times arrive." "Is that so?" Noah forced a smile. "What can you do even if you wake up?" "I can't pretend that I didn't hear you." Athena's voice was cold and there was a hint of dissatisfaction in it. "Are you saying that this concubine can't be of any use?" Noah was stunned when he heard that. His eyes lit up immediately. "Do you have a way to destroy the divine blade?" However, Athena poured a bucket of cold water on him. "No, that displeasing steel cannot be destroyed. Even if you were able to defeat the hero, it would still be the same." That being said, Athena's tone changed again. "However, if you want to get rid of that man, you don't need to destroy the divine blade." "You don't need to destroy the divine blade?" Noah quickly asked. "Then what should I do?" I've thought about this problem before, but after I fused with you, this problem was solved. Athena said. After becoming one with you, I was able to see your life from the depths of your heart. Noah's eyes widened. Did Athena see my life? Doesn't that mean, as if she saw through Noah's thoughts? Athena laughed out loud. Should I say that you're the one who transcends the world? Or the lucky one who is protected by the world? Even though I'm the goddess of wisdom, I didn't expect you to be such an existence. No wonder you're my fated one. As expected. Athena knew all of Noah's secrets. Thanks to you, I saw the hope of defeating that man. Athena's words were shocking. Noah Dole, turn me into the steel that saves the world. Chapter 1504. For a moment, Noah even wondered if he had heard wrongly. However, Athena's indifferent tone dispelled Noah's doubts. Turn me into the taboo steel. This way, the man's mission will be ended by you. Wait. Wait. Noah hurriedly shouted for him to stop. He took a deep breath and calmed down the astonishment in his heart before asking, "What are you doing? You said that I will turn you into the divine sword of salvation." I know what you're thinking. Athena's tone didn't change at all. She was still as calm as ever. But you did not hear wrongly. I will turn into the steel of salvation and help you defeat the hero. Even if you say that, I still don't understand. Noah directly asked. What is going on? It is actually very simple. If you think about it carefully, you will understand. Athena did not keep Noah in suspense and answered Noah's question very straightforwardly. The divine sword is an existence that is integrated with the man. Therefore, once the man dies, he will turn into the divine sword and fall into a deep slumber. Then, as long as the divine sword is destroyed, the man will naturally not be able to awaken and will fall into eternal slumber. He will return to the myth and be defeated by you. Unfortunately, the divine sword is indestructible. Athena said. If that is the case, then there is no need to destroy the divine sword. Just kill the man who is the object of the divine sword. The divine sword that was integrated with the hero was equivalent to the hero himself. After all, the so-called God of Steel originally referred to the living God of Swords. This way of saying that the sword that was originally made of steel had the appearance of a human and also a soul. Just like the monsters mentioned in many TV dramas, they were originally just animals, plants, or even something else, but they cultivated into a human body. It was the same principle. In other words, the current hero was equivalent to being beaten back to his original state. Although the body turned into the divine sword and fell into a deep slumber, the hero's soul was still in the divine sword. I am the dark goddess in charge of the underworld. Toying with souls is also my domain. That is why I was able to abandon my previous body and become one with you, Athena explained. Right now, I am in a state where only my soul is left. As long as I can fuse with the divine blade and expel the soul of the man sleeping in the divine blade, wouldn't that be enough? Become one with the divine blade? Noah asked in disbelief. Can that kind of thing be done? Of course not, Athena said without hesitation. I am the goddess of the earth, not the god of swords. In the end, I am an existence that is incompatible with the god of swords. How could I possibly possess the body of the god of swords and turn myself into steel? After saying that, Athena suddenly changed her mind. However, I have read your life story from the depths of your heart, and know the existence of the steel in your hands. Hearing this, Noah could not help but lower his head and look at the demon slayer in his hands. The steel in your hands is not a god, but a so-called spirit. Athena's voice slowly sounded in Noah's heart. After knowing about this existence that is similar to steel, I thought that since I could not become the god of swords, then I would turn myself into a sword spirit and become one with the divine sword that saved the world. That way, I would be able to expel the soul of that man. W.H. What? Noah was really stunned. You want to become a sword spirit? That's right, Athena said proudly. That man's servant was also the goddess of the earth in the past. Through death, she fell and became the god of swords. I only need to do the same thing. Noah could not wrap his head around it. Become a sword spirit. That kind of thing can be done. Are you doubting my wisdom? Athena seemed to have seen through Noah's thoughts and laughed coldly. Although the time was a little short, during the period of my deep sleep, this concubine has already created a secret technique to transform into a spirit. Relying on this secret technique, this concubine can transform into a so-called spirit. At that time, as long as I successfully assimilate with the divine blade, this concubine will transform into a sword spirit. The success rate is more or less guaranteed. Athena suddenly changed the topic of conversation. Of course, if it's just like this, then there is no way to assimilate the divine sword. You must cut off the connection between the divine sword and that man. Fortunately, you have the sword of spiritual speech that can even cut off divinity. With that sword, it is not a problem to cut off the connection between the divine sword and the hero. Now, I will pass on the knowledge of that man to you. As soon as she finished speaking, a large amount of knowledge flashed in Noah's mind. In India, there were two famous epics that were known as the oldest epics. One of them was called Mahabharata. The other one was called Ramayana. These two epics were the foundation of Indian culture and had a considerable role in enlightening the development of Indian literature and religion. A large part of Indian mythology was related to the stories recorded in Ramayana and Mahabharata. For example, the main character of Ramayana, Rama. In the box, as one of the three supreme gods in Indian mythology, the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, Galgi, once had a dispute with Noah. The main character of Ramayana, Rama, was the 7th incarnation of Vishnu. In the story of Ramayana, it was said that in the human world, there was a powerful demon named Luobona. Luobona ruled a race called Rakshasa. It was a type of evil spirit that specialized in eating human flesh. It was a true demon. Therefore, the leader of this demon race, Luobona, was called the Rakshasa king, the king of demons, and was called the demon king by people. Luobona had the special characteristic of not being hurt by gods and demons other than mortals. Other than humans, other races, be it gods or demons, could not leave a mark on his body. In order to destroy this demon king, the gods of heaven sought the help of Vishnu. Therefore, Vishnu descended from heaven and became a human, reincarnated into a human, and became the king of Bisara, the son of the 10 chariots king, and also the prince of Bisara. This prince was Rama. However, this prince's life was quite bumpy. He suffered from the conspiracy of his stepbrother, and was exiled abroad, wandering for more than 14 years. The only people who accompanied this tragic prince wandering abroad were the prince's wife, Siddhartha, and his brother, Rashmana. Later, Rama and the other two wandered to the forest occupied by the Rakshasa race who had committed many evil deeds, and started a battle with the Rakshasa. The brave Rama defeated many Rakshasas one after another. In the end, the demon king of the Rakshasa race, Luobona, appeared. Even the gods were helpless against the demon king, who coveted the beauty of Rama's wife, Siddhartha, and captured her. In order to save his wife, Rama and his brother, Rashmana, embarked on a journey, and rushed to the city where Luobona was. In the process, Rama met a white ape. The white ape's name was Hanuman, and he was the son of the wind god Vayu in Indian mythology. He was also the prototype of the great sage equal to heaven's son Wukong in the famous Chinese novel, Journey to the West. Rama, who got acquainted with the white ape Hanuman, received the help of the son of the wind god. With the help of his younger brother Rashmana and the white ape Hanuman, who followed him, he finally annihilated the demon king Ravana and took back his wife. He returned to the country of Bazar and became the king. In other words, Rama was a hero born to destroy the demon king, and he was also the king who finally succeeded in destroying the demon king. Therefore, he who appeared in the apocalypse was called the last king. Therefore, the gods of heaven gave him the mission of subjugating all the demon kings on earth. Therefore, the masked wind god who followed him was the ape god who had white body hair and could control storms. Therefore, the subordinate god who helped this brave warrior to bear all the distortions and arrogance of the god of disobedience, and was called the younger brother, was Rashmana. That's right. The brave warrior who destroyed the demon king was called Rama. When the name came out from Noah's mouth, in his heart, the stone plate with 10 patterns on the outline suddenly turned and pointed in the direction of the warrior. Clang! A bright golden light flashed in Noah's hand. The god of disobedience was a god who had deviated from the myths and appeared on the earth. Killing such a god would only cause the god to lose his body on the earth and return to the myths. In other words, perhaps one day, the god who had been killed would once again appear on the earth as a disobedient. Including that man, Athena said bluntly. Perhaps one day, that man will once again appear on the earth and carry out his mission of annihilating the demon king. Who knows? Perhaps. Noah shrugged. When that time comes, if I am still in this world, I will free him again. Oh. Athena turned around and looked at Noah with interest. What if you are not in this world? Then I will let someone else do it. Noah suddenly smiled. The world is so big, and its history is so long. There will always be someone who can become the protagonist of this world and solve all the problems. You really dare to say that? Humans are just one of the many races in this world. Whether or not they can survive is still unknown. It is unrealistic for you to dream of someone who can dominate the world. Athena said with a happy expression on her face. However, since the heavenly child who is protected by the world has said so, I will believe in the possibility of humans. Noah could not help but smile as he turned around and looked at Athena. Athena also turned around and looked at Noah. The two of them stood facing each other and looked at each other for a long time without speaking. After a while, Noah spoke softly. You are now a sword spirit, right? After assimilating with the blade of God, I have indeed become a sword spirit. Athena's lips slowly curled up. Now that you have confirmed this, what do you want to say? Isn't that obvious? Noah said without hesitation. Since you are a spirit, then contract with me and become my contracted spirit. This sentence made Athena smile. Haven't you noticed that I have become your authority? Authority? Noah was stunned. That's right. Athena nodded. Although the process was a little complicated, you have indeed defeated Lord Rama. Pandora's great curse has begun to activate, and the authority you have obtained is the blade of the hero. Naturally, I, who have assimilated with the blade of God, have become your authority. Saying so, Athena smiled sweetly. In other words, whether I am willing or not, you only need a thought to contract with me. Furthermore, I can only contract with you. Athena. In the past, she was a goddess. Now, she had become Noah's contracted spirit. Thus, she was born. Chapter 1506. After Rama's return to the mythical world, the wind and fire auras that were constantly increasing in the world also tended to calm down. Sensing that the aura had calmed down, the grand ceremonies that were held together all over the world were also announced to stop. All the forces in the world of magic began to send people to confirm the extent of the damage caused by the appearance of the last king. As a result, although the grand ceremony to calm down the aura was held, there were still a few active volcanoes that erupted, causing quite a disaster. Especially the island country that Rama appeared in, a lot of the aura of the earth was involuntarily extracted by this brave warrior and turned into a land of death. At the same time, there were also many volcanic eruptions that caused some damage. Fortunately, only some buildings were damaged, and there were no casualties. It was considered a great fortune in the midst of misfortune. However, this also made many of the higher-ups in the world of magic and spells feel a sense of fear. One should know that Rama had only appeared for a short period of about a day. Moreover, the next day, all the forces in the world worked together to hold a ceremony to calm down the aura, delaying the increase of the fire and wind auras. Even so, such a degree of damage was still caused. One could imagine how much danger Rama would bring to the world if he were to continue living. Thinking of this, the higher-ups of the major forces felt very fortunate. No matter what, this incident was finally over in a way that was daunting but not dangerous. Although the major forces did not participate in the battle against Rama and the other gods of disobedience, the battle against the gods of disobedience was originally the responsibility of the god-slayers. As ordinary humans, even magicians who were far beyond the reach of ordinary people could not participate in it. What they could do was to provide some manpower support in the battle between the god-slayers and the gods of disobedience, as well as clean up the aftermath of the battle. Therefore, no matter which country it was, the major forces in the world of magic would be busy. At this time, perhaps only the god-slayers who were in charge of the battle could be idle. In a room in the hotel, Luo Hao was sitting cross-legged on the bed, meditating while chatting with Noah. In the battle with the masked wind god, Luo Hao did not suffer any injuries. However, in order to defeat the masked wind god, Luo Hao used up a lot of curse power, causing the curse power to be in a state of deficit. This was not surprising. If Luo Hao had used the power of the great strength Vajra divine kung fu against the masked wind god to determine the victor, then the curse power consumption would not be so serious. However, the prideful sect leader Luo Hao had chosen to use the power of the dragon roar and tiger roar grand magic against the masked wind god. That was simply asking for trouble. No matter what, his opponent was the wind god. On the other hand, the great art of dragon and tiger's roar was the power to create storms through ballads. Against a god who could manipulate wind, using wind to fight was naturally not an easy task. In view of this, in the end, even though Luo Hao still obtained victory, it was extremely difficult, causing his curse power to be depleted. Left with no choice, Luo Hao could only stay here for the time being and meditate to recover the lost curse power. Rama. After confirming the true identity of the hero who annihilated the demon king from Noah, Luo Hao nodded as if she had expected it. It really is that prince. What's wrong? Noah was surprised. You knew it long ago. I only knew it after the battle with the wind god. Luo Hao nodded. In the battle, I uncovered the true face of the wind god. After learning that he was the ape god with white body hair, I guessed the identity of the hero. Because Rama liberated the weapons given by the gods in the heaven realm and presented the Manchala, people would naturally associate it with the Indian mythology that had a relationship with the Manchala. In Indian mythology, when the white-haired ape god was mentioned, the first thing that would come to mind was Hanuman, who helped Rama defeat the demon king Ravana in the Ramayana. In a sense, Hanuman's fame was even greater than Rama's. After all, he was the prototype of the protagonist's son Wukong, the great sage equal to heaven in the famous masterpiece Journey to the West in China. For Luo Hao, he was naturally the first god that came to mind. Since the masked wind god was Hanuman, then the lord that Hanuman followed was only Rama, right? Moreover, Rama was the seventh incarnation of Vishnu who was born to annihilate the demon king. This legend matched up with the hero who annihilated the demon king. In this way, Luo Hao easily guessed that the true identity of the hero was Rama. It was precisely because the exposure of himself meant exposure of his Lord that Hanuman did not hesitate to conceal his appearance, not even speaking half a word, and had always pursued the doctrine of mystery. As long as one had some understanding of Indian mythology, it was not difficult to guess the hero's real name after seeing the Manchala and Hanuman's appearance. However, I didn't expect Prince Rama to have the god relic that can resurrect the sword god, Luo Hao said, somewhat annoyed. I've lost my composure for not being able to completely eliminate the enemy. If this were to spread, I'm afraid the people in the martial world would laugh at me, Luo Tzuilian, for being a careless and reckless person. You're overthinking, Noah said, feeling a little speechless. Who would dare to insult you, Luo Hao? Even so, if this were to spread, my reputation as the unparalleled chief of the martial world would still be tarnished. Luo Hao thought about it seriously. Why don't we get to give an order to forbid anyone from mentioning this? Anyone who disobeys will have their tongues cut off as a punishment. You. Noah could not pretend that he did not hear anything. You're not allowed to give an order like that. Luo Hao frowned. Why? Why? Noah rolled his eyes. Even if I were to tell you the reason, a girl like you who lacks self-awareness might not understand. Since you can't understand, then don't ask so many questions. If I tell you not to do it, then you're not allowed to do it. It sounded like an order. If someone else dared to say that to Luo Hao, they would have to wait for Luo Hao to fly into a rage. However, what Noah said made Luo Hao nod her head obediently. I understand. Since my husband said so, then let's do it. Noah finally understood. Although Luo Hao was a tyrant without a shred of self-awareness, she was not a bad person. Moreover, as a woman from China who had survived 200 years ago, Luo Hao was unexpectedly very traditional. She abided by China's 3 obediences and 4 virtues, and basically followed Noah's lead. Luo Hao would only listen to Noah's words without any reason. Since this matter has been settled, then there is no need for me to continue staying here. Luo Hao got up from the bed and turned her beautiful eyes to Noah. Husband, I'm preparing to return to Mount Lu. Return to Mount Lu? Noah asked. Now? I've recovered most of my lost curse power. I have no problem using God's celerity, Luo Hao said without hesitation. If that's the case, as a married woman, it's not good for me to show my face in public. You're quite open-minded. Noah laughed bitterly and looked straight at Luo Hao. Once you return, perhaps we won't be able to see each other for a while. With Luo Hao's personality, she would not come out after returning to Mount Lu. Then, unless Noah went to Mount Lu to visit Luo Hao in China, it would be very difficult for them to meet again. Moreover, Noah could leave this world at any time. Who knew when the next time they would meet again? Luo Hao did not care about this at all. She was even more straightforward than Noah. A real man should have ambitions everywhere. My husband is a peerless hero, an invincible king. You should travel the world and accomplish great things. There is no need to have any misgivings because of me. With that, Luo Hao stepped forward and straightened Noah's collar. No matter what, this concubine is still a king realm expert, so I naturally understand this principle. Therefore, husband, you don't need to worry about me. This concubine will always wait for husband's grand arrival at Mount Lu. At that time, let this concubine serve you well. After saying that, Luo Hao took half a step back and gave Noah a deep look. Then, she turned around and disappeared from where she stood. Seeing this, Noah sighed. I really don't know how to react to this girl. Chapter 1507. After Luo Hao left, Noah returned to his room. Gotcha! With the soft sound of the door opening, Noah opened the door of his room and walked in. As soon as he entered the room, Noah was slightly startled. Because, in the room, on the table next to the sofa, there was a piece of paper. Noah stepped forward, picked up the paper, and read the contents. Since I've done what I need to do, then I have no reason to stay any longer. I'll leave the Holy Grail with you for the time being. If there's a chance, I'll find a way to get it. Alexander Gascoigne. Seeing this, Noah understood. Yarek also left. Moreover, he left without a sound. This was quite like that guy's style. Presumably, the guy known as the Black Prince must have felt that this way of leaving was in line with his own aesthetics. However, it was just like what Alice had said. That guy Yarek seemed rational, but in fact, he was quite twisted in some places. It's not impossible to have a cool way of leaving, but before that, it's more normal to consider whether it's normal to barge into someone else's room without permission, right? Noah couldn't help but twitch his mouth, crumpling the paper in his hand. Sure enough, that guy seems rational, but in the end, he's still a reckless god-slaying demon king. If this sentence was heard by Yarek, he would definitely spare no effort to refute it, right? Unfortunately, in fact, Yarek had neglected the question of whether one could barge into someone else's room without permission. If this was used against him, it would definitely make that guy who thought he was very rational unable to say anything and feel aggrieved. The weakness is surprisingly obvious. Noah sighed. No wonder Alice could resist him. Saying this, Noah casually threw the paper ball in his hand into the trash can with great precision. Then, he removed two weapons from his back. They were two small swords the size of a palm. One was a steel sword that was completely silver. The other was an iron sword that was completely platinum. These two small swords were Noah's contracted sprites. This was especially true for the platinum-colored dagger, which Noah had only recently obtained. It was the divine blade that could even cut through stars and was known as the strongest divine blade. That was Noah's elven device, as well as Noah's authority. As for the specifics, Noah had yet to find out what had happened to the blade after it was assimilated by Athena. However, there was no rush. In any case, there would be plenty of time for research in the future. Now, there was another problem that made Noah very vexed. Thinking of this, Noah faintly sighed. He raised the small silver sword, looked at it, and said helplessly, "I say, Aster, you should be appeased by now, right?" While saying that, Noah couldn't help but glance at the back of his left hand. There, Noah's elven mark was imprinted. However, originally, on the back of Noah's left hand, there should only be one mark made of crisscrossing swords. But now, the crisscrossing swords mark had shrunk by half. The other half was occupied by another crisscrossing swords mark. The two marks made of crisscrossing swords were placed side by side, occupying the entire back of Noah's left hand. It looked like an elven mark. But in reality, it was made up of two elven marks. Generally speaking, even if it was an elven user of the same attribute and type, after contracting with an elven user, the elven mark would be more or less different. Moreover, as if it had a territorial consciousness, it would not be branded on the same part of the elven user's body. However, Aster's and Athena's elven marks were not only exactly the same, but they also occupied the back of Noah's left hand. If it was not for the gap between the two elven marks, it would look like the same elven mark. The reason why this happened, according to Athena, was probably because of the secret technique to transform into an elf. After all, I used the existence of that sword elf as the basis to create the secret technique to transform into an elf. So, if we really count it, I am now like her sister, right? Because of this, the two elven marks were exactly the same, and they occupied the same part of the elven user's body. Of course, there was still a difference between the two. Although Aster and Athena were both sword elves, Aster was a sword elf of the steel attribute, while Athena was a sword elf of the holy attribute. Originally, Noah thought that Athena, as the former goddess of earth, would be of the earth or darkness attribute. Who knew that she would be of the holy attribute, which was the rarest and most precious of the 5 elements? This was unexpected. However, it should be because Athena had assimilated the blade of salvation. In short, Noah still had to find out how powerful Athena was. Compared to this, Aster's problem was more vexing for Noah. Aster. Noah tapped the body of the silver dagger in his hand and said in a friendly tone. It's time for you to talk to me, right? Ever since he formed a contract with Athena, Aster had not made any moves. Even when Noah called her, the elven girl did not respond to Noah. Noah, who understood Aster, understood. This elven girl was probably angry. Moreover, he was very angry. At this time, Athena's voice sounded in Noah's mind. It seems that the matter of you forming a contract with me has made this elven girl unhappy. Athena spoke as if it was none of her business. Although as a subordinate, it's really hard for me to agree with such an attitude towards my master. Dealing with the problems between subordinates is also a way for me to show my master's magnanimity. My dear fated one, how do you intend to deal with the problems between your contracted spirits? Just as Athena's voice sounded in Noah's mind, Aster, who had been ignoring Noah, finally spoke. Chapter 1508. Clang Dash. Dazzling silver light and dazzling platinum light appeared in the air at the same time. Within the light, Noah's small silver sword and platinum sword simultaneously disintegrated into light particles and converged into human figures. Then, Aster and Athena simultaneously appeared within the light and landed on the ground, looking at each other. At this moment, there was no expression on the faces of the 2 girls. They were calm, and it could even be said that they lacked emotion. However, when the 2 girls looked into each other's eyes, one carried a sense of mystery while the other carried a sense of flirtatiousness. They looked rather charming. However, the oppressive aura emanating from the 2 girls was rather shocking, telling others just how serious Aster and Athena were. These 2 girls were actually prepared to fight. This was because the 2 elven girls used Noah's heart as a platform to converse when they transformed into their sword forms. As a result, even though the conversation between the 2 of them seemed to be long, it was actually just a split second of communication between their minds. Because of this, Noah didn't even have time to react before the 2 elves started fighting. This made Noah shocked and he hurriedly spoke. Wait. Why did you 2 suddenly have a conflict? Master, please don't stop me. Aster expressionlessly said. I have to tell this divine sword elf who is Master's true contracted elf. Also don't stop me. Athena also expressionlessly said. No matter what, I was once the queen of the realm of gods and the goddess of war. There is no reason for me to turn a blind eye to someone's provocation and challenge. So you're prepared to fight? The winner has the right to speak. Noah said. Do you have to fight and kill for no reason? Don't worry, Master. Aster was still expressionless. It won't take long. I can deal with this elf immediately. I have never met a life form that dares to boast so shamelessly before the queen of the realm of gods. Athena's pair of flirtatious snake eyes stared closely at Aster. Although I have lost all of my power as the goddess of earth in the past, I have assimilated with the divine blade that saved the world. Now, I am the divine blade, and the power of the divine blade is my power. With that, Athena raised her hand. Beep, beep, beep. Along with the crisp sound of an electric shock, a dazzling electric light flashed in Athena's hand. This is... Noah said in surprise. Lightning of salvation. The true lightning of salvation is the incarnation of the countless weapons that the gods of heaven bestowed upon the heroes who annihilated the demon king. I am now assimilating with the divine blade, allowing the divine blade that was originally bestowed by the gods of heaven to become independent. Athena said with a calm expression. Thus, the current lightning of salvation is just pure lightning. However, it is still the heavenly lightning transformed from the divine blade and is more powerful than ordinary lightning. I am not confident that I can control the power of the lightning of salvation. So, Holy Sword Elf, don't die so easily. Before Noah could say anything to stop her, the electric light flashing in Athena's hand turned into a flash of light and shot out. In an instant, it pierced through space and struck Aster. Beep, beep, beep. The violent lightning immediately covered Aster's petite body. It moved back and forth on her body, constantly striking her with electricity. However, Aster's expression did not change at all in the face of the violent electric shock. She ignored the violent lightning on her body and said softly, "It's useless. It's useless. I have the highest resistance to curses. Even heavenly lightning can't harm me." Is that so? Athena looked as if she had expected this. Apparently, she had already guessed this outcome. If that's the case, then I'll use a little annoying power. Suddenly, the flickering lightning on Athena's hand disappeared and was replaced by a whitish gold radiance. Wang! Amidst the trembling of space, the platinum light bloomed from Athena's hand and illuminated the entire room. Looking at the dazzling platinum light, Noah was really shocked. The light of salvation. Impressively, it was the light of salvation that could turn the essence of the earth into a blow that could split a star. Athena could even use the light of salvation. In the past, the hero who annihilated the demon king had extracted the essence of the earth more than once and turned it into a blow that could even split a star. Athena said self-deprecatingly. That was a power that could not be used without the support of the earth's essence. The hero was able to use it freely because he had absorbed the life of his servant girl. As the former goddess of the earth, after I assimilated with the divine blade, I was able to awaken this power and use it freely. This power was formed after taking the life of the goddess of the earth. To me, it's an absolute taboo. Athena's expression finally became a little cold. Therefore, Holy Sword Spirit, surrender to me now and I can still forgive you. Wait until I use this taboo power on you, then I'll really be angry. I won't surrender to you. Aster replied without any explanation. Master only needs me as his contracted sprite. You really don't know what's good for you. Athena snorted. Then let me teach you a little lesson. Just as Athena was about to release the light of salvation that could split a star, Noah finally could not stand it anymore. Stop! The light of salvation that blossomed in Athena's hand suddenly became sluggish. Without Athena's permission, it dimmed and disappeared without a trace. Athena frowned. But there was no other way. Who asked Athena to become Noah's authority? As Noah's authority, Noah's orders were absolute to Athena. Therefore, Athena was Noah's contracted spirit. Only Noah could form a contract with her. Whether she was willing or not, as long as Noah wanted to, he could use her power to form a contract with her. Compared to Athena, Aster, a proper contracted spirit, had more freedom. At that moment, Aster looked at Noah silently and said with an emotionless expression, Master, do you really want to form a contract with this divine blade spirit? Being stared at by Aster's mysterious eyes, Noah could not help but feel a trace of guilt. However, Noah shook his head and squatted in front of Aster. He stroked Aster's head. Apologies, Aster. I know you don't want to see me form a contract with another spirit other than you. But Athena is not only my contracted spirit, but also my authority. Even if we don't form a contract, she can't leave me. Aster fell silent. This young elf had always been emotionless. It was hard for others to know what she was thinking. But Noah knew that Aster was still dissatisfied and was not convinced by him. Why don't we do this? Noah said helplessly. As long as you listen to me obediently, then as long as it is within my power, you can make any request. No matter what it is, I will agree to it and help you achieve it. Can you stop being angry? Hearing this, Aster finally raised his head and stared at Noah. Any request? Any request is fine. Noah nodded. Of course, the prerequisite is that I can do it. How about it? Aster's eyes flickered. He looked at Noah and then at Athena. In the end, he nodded unwillingly. Noah was relieved. Athena glanced at Noah. Using rewards to appease your subordinates. It's not a very clever method, but it's not bad either. It's passable. Noah rolled his eyes. Who was the one who caused this to happen? At this moment, Noah's phone rang. Noah was startled. He took out his phone and picked up the call. After a while, Noah's expression changed. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.